Oh, hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Vale-Smith, Coruscate. Alright, so I guess this would be round 4 of my covering Vale-Smith. For those who don't know, he's been putting out really solid mixes of deconstructed club, down-tempo, glitch hop, IDM, trap, whatever else you want to call it, for a few years now. The kind of guy who I could hear his stuff from a distance and instantly be able to tell who made it without looking. At this point, I felt like I had a pretty good idea on what to expect out of him. He's stuck pretty firmly to the same kind of styles for as long as I've been listening to him. I figured I knew exactly what this was gonna sound like, figured I was gonna really like it, just as I did with his last 2 projects. Both Origami and Are You Sick of Being Unlucky here, they did nab spots on my year-end lists in the years they came out. May not have fallen in love with either of them immediately, but both ended up more replayable than I might have expected throughout the course of those years, and I still absolutely recommend giving them a shot. I figured Coruscate was just going to be another round of the same kind of stuff, and I was definitely looking forward to it. What I was not anticipating, though, was the level of enjoyment I actually got out of it, because, Coruscate was significantly better than those already solid last 2 projects. First listen, I was like, yeah, that was definitely a Vale-Smith album. Second listen, I was like, oh, something is starting to hit different about this one. And by the third listen, I was hopping around like Big Quint and thinking, oh my god, it's like he's leveling up in front of me. Even if stylistically a lot of it sounds like exactly what I would have expected, there is one more extra twist added to this album, and that's the fact that he started to incorporate a lot more UK garage elements. This thing is a lot more up-tempo and dance-centric than his last 2, and those elements ended up giving a lot more life and energy to these compositions than I was expecting. His last 2 albums had plenty of bangers to go around, but on average I would have said they tended to err on the more chill side, the more subtle side. They were definitely more down-tempo, I guess. But Coruscate, as I said, it's a lot more energetic. It feels a lot bigger in scale. This is the kind of stuff where I could even envision playing out of some, like, big stadium festival sometimes. Like, he could be the opening act for Rusty or Igloo Ghost or something. Maybe even accidentally end up outshining them. Even if I can't imagine he has the logistical means to play live at all, I still kind of wish it were possible to hear this material in that kind of setting. Every single moment of this project is full of flash and texture and detail. Every track seamlessly links into the next without ever feeling like it's running together. This album is absolutely freaking nuts, and I loved it from start to finish. It was unreal levels of good. Going through individual tracks, right from the very beginning, we're treated to loads of clattering percussion taps, synth arpeggios, and vocal chops going over deep piano textures that sound like they may have been pulled from the closer track on that DJ Sabrina the Teenage DJ album I reviewed like a year ago. And all paying off into this moment 26 seconds in where the track just bursts and kicks into high gear even more than it already was. And from there, there's even a bunch of sidetracks where the beat could go into halftime or double time. An outro of the entire mix getting stuttered a bit and then picking right back up with the next track, Know Me, which features all these catchy yelping vocal samples and disparate trap beats that manage to both clatter all over the place and change up every second, but also feel oddly minimalistic. Different layers of spacey synth ambience starts to build up and later switch up into completely different vocal samples being chopped up. So much going on every single second, but there's always coherent grooves and melodies, and it never feels purposeless or messy. This pair of interconnected tracks pretty well sets the tone for what you're gonna get for the rest of the album. Everything else here focuses on different permutations of the same kinds of sounds and stomps away at similar tempos. And again, each track feels like a direct continuation of the one that came before without ever being so seamless that you don't notice the transition at all. Like how the following track, Hang Tight, immediately carries off the banging trap beats of the previous track, but switches over to these much more cheerful synth chord blips. Even has time for a key change halfway through. And then a passage shifts into some skittering IDM beats and lots of pretty cascades of various synth bell textures that have this really bright and sunny vibe to them. Even has a little time for some minimal Rhodes electric piano playing and low-key guitar plucking for a peaceful little outro. Looper does take the tempo down a bit with some moodier and more bubbling textures of synth notes. even with some bubble pop sound effects getting stuttered in a few moments, and some sharp flume-like leads going over very minimal and melancholy blurs of synth too. And it really says something when a track like this might be considered a lower point here, because I still thought it was great as everything else here, and kept up the same level of energy we were at before. Although then we switch over to Ace Ransom, which feels like I've been abruptly pulled down a dark tunnel. All these cavernous pads and shifting chords going over skittering percussion and kind of reminding me a bit of, I don't know, Outerker's Earlight Get Zero. And even this track progressively starts to feel bigger and brighter as it goes along, with the key changes and stutter edits, and paying off gloriously in the last 20 seconds or so where the beat goes away entirely. I really like how there's so many tracks like these that seem to like deconstruct themselves right in front of you, start with a cool idea, chop it up, and then turn it into a totally different cool idea that builds perfectly off of it. Anyway, next we get Revealing Light, which, as you may guess, feels quite a bit brighter and warmer than the previous cuts. The way these synth xylophones go over synth guitars gives me odd vaporwave-ish vibes, and all the marching beats around it with these massive sounding pads way in the background just make it feel so freaking nice and uplifting. I do think this is the first track that sounded like it had an actual ending and stopping point instead of getting cut off and feeling like the next track was a switch up of the previous one. So this is generally where I perceive to be the halfway point of the album, even though I think that'd technically be one more track afterwards. But anyway, this album was already great up to this point, but it gets even better as we go on. Give Your Best is definitely one of the most UK garage-ish cuts in the bunch, with the way those vocal samples echo in the background, giving like mild burial vibes, I guess, as they go over an ocean of intense synth melodies and skittering beats, though it switches over into some more standard trap beats halfway through. Following track Everything mostly starts in standard fare for Vale-Smith with some moody synth chords, trap beats, glittering melodies. Sounds like the kind of thing that would have fit perfectly well alongside the track listing of his last album, even with all the little side tracks that have a bit more of an epic sounding flavor to them. But what really made me love this track was that last minute or so where the entire mix of the track just completely shatters and falls apart. All the synth chords fall into rhythmless blurs, the percussion echoes and bounces all over the place. It feels like some weird alien cavern being formed out of all the disparate pieces that once felt more conventional. Seriously, one of the coolest moments in the whole album. But if you thought that track was nuts, it's nothing compared to Voracity in the Warehouse, which might be the album's single craziest and most unhinged cut overall. The rapid shifts from flashing synth effects, borderline industrial percussion, and smoky clouds of pads into random flashes of synth chords and melodies that switch tempo and skip beats. Other house beats being introduced, slowly building with all its random shifts and glitches, and then paying off in the last 40 seconds or so with this insane banging climax right at the end. Oh my freaking god. I've got like no words for this. And we still got 5 tracks left. Think Lavender. That does feel like a nice breather after the insanity of the last track, but still has a particularly satisfying progression of piano chords and bright synth melodies going over beats that almost have this odd, like, plodding disco-ish feel to them, I guess. Though there's also some sections that have all these stuttered splash sound effects and chopped up yelling for good measure. That's awesome already, but then you get the even more well-polished Tethered to Us, which might be the most poppy cut in the bunch, with its chipper female vocal chops going over its deep bass and lo-fi hip-hop electric piano chords and skittering UK garage beat. Feels very dreamy and colorful. And then Setting Sun gets even brighter and cheerier with its clapping beats and various textures of chiming and clanging melodies. Feels more like a soundtrack to the sun rising than setting, with how bright and happy everything sounds and how much skittering energy it has. Enough so where my mind went towards the Chemical Brothers cut of the same name, despite this cut not sounding even the slightest bit like it. The album could have even ended here if you wanted, but we still got 2 tracks left at the end. Underthoughts isn't a particular standout for me, and the trap beat on this one has a lot more of a conventional thin brittleness to it, I guess. But even this cut I'd have trouble marking as the least favorite with how good all those flute riffs and stuttered guitar sound together. Like, it's one of the lower points, but it's still really freaking good. And then we're finally led into the album's true ending, Hummingbird. I could complain about that one little moment with those yelping chipmunk vocals where it sounds like Vale-Smith is trying to bet his best to sound like Igloo Ghost, even if that only lasts like 10 seconds. And I could complain about how the track starts to feel like it's ending halfway through with that little moment that switches over to a more ambient approach with a slower tempo only to pick right back up, and then end in a much more abrupt fashion that sounds like it's about to lead into something else and then doesn't. But this cut still sounds really freaking nice. I really like how all these melodies do have a sense of like bittersweet finality to them in spite of how they just keep randomly shifting around. And those string quartet samples, oh my god. Not sure if it's a stronger closer than Yusuke's Witness on his last album, but it's still definitely a really satisfying finish to this project. And yeah, that's everything on Coruscate. I was just completely floored by this entire thing. I already really liked Vale-Smith's previous stuff, but this is just on a whole different level that I was not prepared for at all. Especially if I'm able to like just sit up and give it my full attention. Albums that resonate this much with me typically only happen like 4 to 5 times a year at best. There was even one listen of this thing where it might have even crossed over into 9 out of 10 territory, and that's typically a once a year occasion. It didn't stay on that level on subsequent listens, but the fact that I was even briefly considering it for that one moment is pretty incredible. Especially knowing this guy is still just a small-time artist working out of his bedroom, and possibly better known for his review and reaction videos as Buffalo Staple. I still remember that All for a Cascade project he did that you can't listen to anymore, but I still have saved in my iTunes library. And it's surreal to hear an artist who once sounded like a pretty average, no-name producer, clearly just getting started, to come around and sound like this only like 3-4 years later. It's insane to see how far he's come, now putting out stuff that feels like it could get him signed to Warp Records if he wanted. And to think this is the first new album I heard in 2022 at all. I think this year's off to a pretty good start if an album that's got a pretty high chance of being one of my top favorites of the year came out on January 1st. I don't really know what else to say. This album was absolutely freaking stellar and definitely worth your time to check out. Even if I doubt it's going to lead to some kind of commercial breakthrough for him, it feels like the kind of album that should be that if he had the means to get it marketed like that. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, this was flat out excellent. I'm overall feeling an 8.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.